Each day, hundreds of people pass through Redcliffe Hospital, an hour north of Brisbane. But few know the story of how it was built. It's a story that stretches back generations into a dark chapter of Queensland's past that is rarely spoken about.
There's 150 years of history that really I think it'll be important for all of Australia, but particularly all of Queensland to understand.
Barrister Joshua Creamer is on a mission to unearth that history as the chair of Queensland's first truth-telling and healing inquiry.
Before I commence...
Over 3 years, it will trace the impact of colonisation, culminating with a report that promises to be a defining source on the state's history and a blueprint for its future.
It's actually just about recognising we've had a history that very few of us have learnt.
We always got to remember what came before us.
In Cherbourg, 3 hours from Brisbane, the scars of the past are plain to see. Eric Law is president of the local Ration Shed Museum. It tells the story of life under Queensland's notorious segregation laws, widely known as the Act.
The Act is the Queensland Aboriginal Protection Act and the restriction of the sale of opium. Now, it was an act that was put into Parliament 1897, and it was really supposed to be about the protection of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in Queensland. I think when they went along, they got the two P's mixed up. It became more of a punishment act than a protection act.
Under the Act, Aboriginal people were forcibly moved onto missions and reserves like Cherbourg, or Baramba as it was then known.
The Act governed every facet of your life.
To the point where Aboriginal people were considered wards of the state and their children didn't actually belong to them.
Probably about 10, 15 times where I seen an old bloke just burst out in tears, so all those old terrible memories are probably flooding back.
At Baramba, children as young as 5 were taken from their families and put into girls' and boys' dormitories. This is the room where up to 40 boys would sleep. They were forbidden from speaking to their parents.
The one thing I think that they'll always remember was the love of their mother. And that was denied when they were here. You know, can you imagine walking past your mother in the main street and not being able to acknowledge her?
The room is now adorned with the stories and artwork of those who grew up in the dormitories, among them Gloria Beckett. At 15, like most of the dormitory girls, she was sent to work as a domestic servant for a white family. By law, most of her wages, and the wages of all Aboriginal people under the Act, were kept in a government trust fund. Gloria told her story to the ABC in 2002.
This is my workers' agreement that allows me to go out to work.
But when Ms Beckett was about to be married and went to collect her savings from 5 years' work, she was told she had the sum total of £3.15 in her account.
That's all I had, they said.
After 5 years' work?
Yes, and I was amazed by that.
Where was the rest?
I don't know.
In today's money, historians estimate that around $500 million was withheld from Aboriginal workers. The funds became known as the stolen wages.
What do we want? Stolen wages! When do we want them? Now!
In 2019, after decades of campaigning, the Queensland Government agreed to a landmark $190 million class action settlement. Joshua Creamer was part of the legal team that secured it.
Why has there not been this generational wealth transfer, the issues around poverty, lack of education? When you do examine history, and particularly from the lens of those cases I've worked on, you understand where those limitations have been.
As for the missing money, government records reveal where some of it went.
There was strong evidence to support the fact that it had been used across the state to build infrastructure for all Queenslanders.
Today is a very historical event, I believe, and it's also a moment of healing.
Redcliffe Hospital is one of the few institutions to acknowledge it was built with stolen wages. The equivalent of around $2.5 million went towards its construction in the 1960s.
There's a big gap in the general population's understanding of what Aboriginal people experienced as a consequence of their parents and grandparents being regulated under the Act. You know, like this Act started in 1897 and, you know, went up into the 1980s.
The legacy of these historic policies will be laid bare as the inquiry begins this week.
The object of the inquiry is to establish an authoritative public record about the past and its consequences.
The inquiry is supposed to be the first step towards a treaty in Queensland, under legislation passed with bipartisan support last May.
The path to treaty is a genuine opportunity for our state to improve the lives of Indigenous Australians.
But 5 months later, after 70% of Queenslanders rejected the Voice referendum, opposition leader David Crisafulli had a change of heart.
It's my view that to continue down the path to treaty would cause further division at a time when Queensland needs unity.
The LNP, widely tipped to win next month's state election, has vowed to scrap the treaty legislation and with it, the inquiry.
Well, I've been upfront about that, and I want Queenslanders to know that we are serious about giving Indigenous communities the opportunity to have a job, go to school and own their own home. That's our focus.
We still hold hope that we might see the LNP change their minds again and actually honour First Nations peoples. But at this stage, what we've seen is an LNP that has turned their back on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people.
Those events
Whether it runs for a few months or a few years, the inquiry will not hear from Gloria Beckett. She died from cancer in 2003, aged 60, spending her final months in the hospital her wages helped build. On her deathbed, she reluctantly accepted a $4,000 reparations payment for her 5 years' work to pay for her funeral. Her family have allowed 730 to share this interview, recorded a year before she died.
Trained as slaves for wealthy people, abused and used, and then not given back our rightfully earned money that we earned. I think we've been robbed.